We made this.
Hello, and welcome to CHUCKYVISION, the podcast that covers all things Chucky. We've covered the movies, we've covered the TV show, we're going to be covering the second season of Chucky, the TV series, when that eventually comes out. And between that, we are covering all things Chucky and Chucky related. Today, we'll be covering some of Chucky's ugly younger siblings. I am your host, Dev Elson, and with me, as always, my co-host is Mark Adams. How are you?
Hello, I'm all right. And I think you very much hit the nail on the head with, this is quite a tenuous link, this episode, but fuck it.
I don't know if it is so tenuous. I think if you are covering killer doll movies, everyone thinks Chucky. I would suspect that the second runner-up would be Puppet Master. They are more successful than Chucky, if you're counting just sequel numbers. There are like 12 of these films.
Well, yes. I hadn't watched any Puppet Master. I'd watched lots of other stuff. I'd watched Annabelle. What else I'd watched? Dolly Dearest I watched. I'm sure I've watched more than just those two.
Because I don't know why I consider it different. But yeah, if you're talking about younger siblings, Annabelle definitely has challenged Chucky for the top spot in recognizable dolls. Everybody knows Chucky. Chucky is up there with Freddy and Jason as a recognizable pop horror star. Horror fans know Puppet Master, but how many have seen, well, even Puppet Master 1, but how many people have seen the sequels?
I think you're right. I think Chucky is, regardless of how many sequels he may or may not have had, is much more iconic than characters like Blade and Pinhead. But that's because Chucky's the star, whereas the kind of Puppet Master characters share.
But yeah, we do get that as well. Obviously, there are other characters in these puppet films. We've talked about how good some of the Chucky films are. Andy Barclay, Karen Barclay, Fiona Dorff as Nika in these new films. A lot of really good, well-written characters. I don't know how many people could name the puppets. I don't know how many people could name the human characters from a Puppet Master film.
Probably just Andre Toulon, no one else.
Yeah. It's an odd franchise because it is so continuous. It just keeps on ticking. I knew about Puppet Master for a while. You've only just gotten into it.
I'd heard of it. I had heard of it, but you kind of emphasized that it was quite important when it comes to killer doll films because of its just sheer numbers. Another difference we need to remember between Puppet Master and Chucky is the first 4 Chucky films released at the cinema. None of the Puppet Master films have been released at the cinema.
Was the first one ever in cinemas?
It was planned to be, but it never was.
Okay. So yeah, I mean, I'm not an encyclopedia on this, but I guess a little background on why Puppet Master has endured so well. Puppet Master belongs to Full Moon Pictures, or Full Moon Features, or Full Moon Entertainment. It's one of those companies that change their name constantly. Most people just know him as Full Moon. Charles Band is one of those kings of B-movie schlock. He really recognized the boom in straight-to-video releases. It didn't go into cinemas, but that's not a bad thing because he knew that you put some scary puppets on the front of a VHS and people are going to rent it just to see what it's like.
Yeah.
Doesn't necessarily matter if they are cheap or bad.
Yeah.
If you rent the movie, you're going to return it one way or another. It doesn't matter whether or not you liked it.
Yeah, that is true. And you've got to remember that is part of what 80s culture was. You put a sensational cover on the front and you then put an 18 rating on the front, which is what this film is. Idiots, like 16-year-old me, would have rented it in the 90s.
Strangely, the more things change, the more they stay the same. In today's culture, I introduced you to Puppet Master in the form of streaming. Full Moon has gone direct. You and I watched these movies on their streaming service through Prime. You saw all these little thumbnails of ridiculous titles, Head of the Family and Blood Dolls and Babes versus Bigfoot and all that nonsense. and you saw
The
all these...
Ginger Dead Man was a personal favourite.
Ginger Dead Man is quite ridiculous. Gary Busey plays an evil gingerbread man.
Of course, it's Gary Busey.
It's what they're banking on. They give you a 7-day free trial. You watch a couple of the movies that you recognise, like Puppet Master and Demonic Toys. It gets near the end of the trial, and you're like, oh, there's so many funny titles in this, though. I want to watch a couple more. They hook you in for a month. They hook you in for that, at least that first month, and then you've given them some money.
That's kind of the case with me. I watched the first Puppet Master, and it was kind of like the time between Christmas and New Year. Well, I'll watch the next one. And then I watched the next one. And then I watched the next one. I've watched 7 films here during my free trial. I almost felt like I should give them at least a fiver. So that's what I've decided to do. I'm going to give them a fiver. And I'm going to watch as much tat as I possibly can throughout the whole of the following month. And I'm only going to give them a fiver, though.
And there is a tremendous amount of tat. They must have made a good amount of money, because we've got a real good deal here. You're watching so much tat in a month for just a fiver. Back in the day, you had to rent all these movies individually if you wanted.
And it would have been more than a fiver.
Obviously, yeah. And they were making so much content. I mean, I can't remember the exact numbers. This was one of their first big hits. This was their first film as Full Moon. Before that, they were Empire Pictures for a while, and they did a few movies, produced a few movies. This was the first big hit for Full Moon. I think it was just this film for 89, and then in 90 they produced like 3 films, and then in 91 they produced like 5 films, and then in 92 they were producing like 10 films, all in one year.
Yeah, that's a lot.
They exploded during the early 90s, and they've still been kind of like that today, like announced in like 2019, and then it was done during 2020. They announced the Deadly 10. These 10 movies they were going to produce and create in 1 year, and they were going to live stream all the behind the scenes and stuff. Sadly, they only made like 2 of those films because then Corona hit, so like couldn't actually push out as much as they used to. That's kind of their spirit, kind of this independent spirit. Troma does it as well. A weird mix between quality and quantity.
It does feel a bit Troma-esque, this whole Full Moon thing, doesn't it?
My love really sides more with Troma. I like Full Moon in concept, but as we'll get into it with this film, not a huge fan on Puppet Master.
Oh, what? It's interesting you say that, though. Puppet Master has a 43% rating on Rotten Tomato, which means that, in theory, it is more popular than Child's Play 2, Child's Play 3, and Seed of Chucky. I don't think that's fair. Child's Play 2 is excellent, and I will go to my grave saying it's excellent. The Rotten Tomato score on Child's Play 2 is an absolute travesty. Possibly fair on 3, but also I think harsh. And Seed is just misunderstood.
Seed feels more like a Troma film because it's just wall-to-wall insanity. And that's what I like about Troma films. Those films, for as cheap as they are, feel packed. Full Moon films, they do not feel packed. They absolutely feel like they are padding the time just to be classified as movies.
They are padding the 88 minutes that we have for this film.
This is the longest 88 minutes I've ever experienced.
Did you see the budget as well?
I didn't. What was it?
It was $400,000.
Wow.
That is so low.
And they spare none of that, especially when you see some of the shots, like the establishing shot of the hotel, which is like a photo of the hotel, like
it is
onto a cliffside.
And they reuse it regularly as well.
Yeah, as Mark said, Mark has watched a lot of these, and we will talk about a kind of retrospective on the franchise afterwards.
Yep, we're only doing 1 episode on Puppet Master. I don't want to do all 10. I would like to discuss the main one, the first one, and then maybe have a little bit of a chat about the rest of them at the end of the episode. We're not doing any more Puppet Masters. We're just not.
Yeah, we should. Yeah, we need to make that clear because, if anything, just because of the quantity, we've only got, presumably, next October for Chucky Season 2. And if we're doing only 1 episode a month, that gives us like 8, 9, maybe 10 episodes. And we're not going to spend the entire year talking Puppet Master because that will be more episodes than we've done on Chucky.
Yeah, let's not.
So let's get into it. 1989, it's Puppet Master.
So the first thing I wrote in my notes, well, this hasn't been remastered.
On this Full Moon streaming service, I noted 3 movies that were titled like Blood Dolls in capital letters, remastered. This is like their most popular title, and it has not been remastered, very evidently.
Yeah, it's poor quality. It is like an 80s VHS, but then again, it was an 80s VHS.
Yeah, it really does seem like even though Charles Band is in charge of all of this, he did not keep the masters. Or I guess there weren't even masters if they shot this on video. Did they shoot it on video? I mean, it looked like it was on film.
Fuck knows. Whatever was the cheapest is probably the answer to that.
I mean, if you said it was $400K, I imagine a lot of that went on developing that film. A lot of money
and
goes towards
animatronics. I don't think much of it went on the acting.
Right, so one credit to the film. I think the Puppet Master has some really good music. It has a real catchy theme.
I think you're right. It's also used across the board for all the other films as well, meaning that it is something that could be considered borderline iconic.
And also money saving, because a lot of Full Moon's music is done by Richard Band, who is Charles Band's brother.
Oh, you're not serious.
Well, it wasn't just Full Moon. He actually was a composer. He did the music for Reanimator.
Oh, okay.
I mean, if you've listened to the Reanimator score, that is also... it's very much ripping off the Psycho score, so, yeah.
Oh, it's disgraceful. It's like, what in the world?
And there are points in this film where it sounds like the Reanimator score, so...
Yeah, you can tell.
It's one of the few elements that keeps me engaged into this movie. I mean, I think it's an interesting prologue, this whole thing. So we're introduced to the Bodega Bay Inn in California. They give a number, don't they? It's 1939?
Yeah, which is a problem later on in the franchise.
So remember that date because it really is useless later on. We meet Andre Toulon, who is this elderly man, and he is bringing life to some little dolls. He brings life to the little Jester doll. Not quite the Dumbala magic. He just says life to life and waves his hands. That's it.
Which is really weird because later on in the franchise, it is a luminous serum that brings the dolls to life.
Definitely not like Reanimator.
Oh, no, not at all.
So Andre Toulon is making these dolls. 2 dolls that really don't play much of a part. We meet the Jester and we meet the Con doll. This is like the one time you even see the Con doll. You don't see him the rest of the film for some reason. And
no.
Jester doesn't really do anything either. But
Jester never does anything across 7 fucking films.
He spins his little head around and he looks sad now and again.
To be fair, his little spinny head malarkey always looks very good.
It is a cool effect. I mean, a lot of these dolls do look really good.
Yeah, I'd agree with that.
Not quite the effects of Kevin Yeager or the animatronics of Chucky. Especially in this first film, though, it's quite done. There's a lot of POV shots, a lot of them just sort of holding the doll just off screen. But then there's some really good stop motion near the end. That's quite impressive. If you're coming in to this film for killer dolls, there's a lot of them.
Probably fair to say I was pleasantly surprised. You'd absolutely trashed this film and Full Moon before I watched any of it. And I was expecting it to be unwatchable. No, I think in a lot of ways, particularly with a 400,000 budget, this is remarkably well done and creative and intelligent.
Intelligent is an interesting
intelligent usage of
yeah.
the money they had and like clever budgeting.
I will say this film, it's not like a later Chucky film. This film really isn't like a comedy horror. It's much more in line with the first Child's Play in that it's trying to play it quite straight.
Yeah, I think
they are trying to make a film that could reasonably go into cinemas.
You could see this having been released in cinemas. There are cinematic releases that aren't as good as this.
Yeah, I like the concept, and I like a lot of the early movies of Full Moon. And this is why I prefer Troma, because I think early Troma, like Toxic Avenger 1, they're making like Toxic Avenger 5 now. The difference in decades, it's still really the same kind of filmmaking and passion in filmmaking. Early Full Moon and current Full Moon are leagues apart.
Very true. Whilst you can see that there's a similar vibe in as much as it's an indie horror company, I don't really feel like these films are similar to Troma other than the budget and the indiness of them. And there does seem to be like a different vibe compared to Trauma.
Yeah, Trauma is very much Bertolt Brecht. It's like the experience is more important than like the story, the narrative. It's entertainment, first and foremost.
Yeah, I mean, what do you expect if you rent a film called A Nymphoid Barbarian in Dinosaur Hell?
I can't tell. Is that Full Moon or is that Trauma?
I love that you couldn't tell. That's Trauma.
Yeah, that is something that Full Moon had, and I feel like has dropped off. Like, they were trying to make these quite sincere films, and they've really given up on that. They've made these... don't worry, audience, we will get to Puppet Master again. But they made these really awful films. But it's like these two women, I can't remember the names, but it's like Zack and Mary Save the Tiger King, or Zack and Mary... fucking coronavirus. No. And it's these completely dumbass, like, stoner comedies, and, like, the evil Bong movies go into this territory. They're trying to be Trauma, and they're failing at it. I like these films when they're more sincere.
Any kind of level of sophistication when protagonists no one really cares about, but they've got a funny name, versus, is just like, no. Although... The Wrestling Women versus the Inca Mummy, or whatever that one is. I enjoyed that immensely, and that was neither Trauma nor Full Moon. That was like a black and white thing. It was just great seeing like women snapmare mummies. It was brilliant.
That does sound amazing.
You and I and our love of horror. Chucky is probably my favourite of the lot. Maybe Freddy. But I think looking at horror together is something that you and I could do until the cows come home. Puppet Master, I'm so glad you put me into it because it was always something that I was going to binge if I ever heard about it. A £5 well spent, I think.
I think it's like when I attempted to shit talk Child's Play 3. It gives off the impression that I don't like this stuff, maybe. I haven't watched all Puppet Masters like you, but I have spent an inane amount of time watching YouTube videos, figure out the timelines and, go through all the sequels and stuff. So I do reluctantly love them for what they are.
Yeah. And I think that's something we've looked at quite a lot with the Chucky franchise, is the continuity and the gentle retcons, even to the point where, Don Mancini has said, well, this is set 2 weeks after Cult of Chucky. I'm not going to explain why. The weather's different. Fuck off. That's kind of okay. That's a gentle, nod your head and move on. Whereas the tone of the Puppet Master franchise and the timeline of the Puppet Master franchise, it's all over the place. It's got more holes in its overarching plot than Swiss cheese. And I don't care.
Tone is definitely something we're going to be talking about here because we have in this prologue, we have a contrast between a presumably Jewish elderly man committing suicide before Nazis get to him. And that's contrasted with the whimsical and silly POV shots of a doll running around. He runs into a door and you hear the little Tweety birds tweeting.
I know, right?
It's such an odd tonal introduction to what you expect a horror movie to be.
The problem with being of a certain age and British is that the sitcom Allo is ingrained into your consciousness. And whenever you see someone from the Gestapo dressed the way the Gestapo were in this opening scene, you think of Herr Flick and von Smallhausen. And the problem with Herr Flick and von Smallhausen is they were so ridiculous and very much deliberately ridiculous because it had to be when you're satirizing the Nazis. I couldn't take them seriously, and obviously the questionable acting didn't help. But what did really resonate with me was I absolutely didn't expect who I thought was going to be the main protagonist to take his own life. And that was actually quite shocking, and I thought was really well done.
Especially when this is the opener to the film, and then both his suicide and the whole Nazi subplot do not come up in this film again.
No, not in this film, no.
They don't matter at all for the actual plot. It's only something that comes up in the sequels.
It's almost like it was planned for the sequels, which is ridiculous because they then botched the timeline.
Yeah, I don't know if this is something he was setting up, because it seems more like something he was just throwing in for, I guess, shock value, or he just thought it was an interesting opening. As I say, there's this whole World War II thing with the Nazis, there's the Egyptian magic, so that goes even further back. And then you've got the main plot line, which is to do with these psychics, and none of them in this first film connect in any narrative form.
It does feel like he picked 3 cool things he wanted and then put puppets around them.
Exactly. I mean, the psychic thing rarely comes up in any of the sequels. It's just so disconnected.
There doesn't seem like much planning here, but I don't care. And I also want to talk about the Egyptian thing very briefly. We had a chat about how the voodoo vodou element of Child's Play isn't very nice. It was written with 80s level of research available. The difference between voodoo and vodou is they are currently practiced by people who believe, whereas the Egyptian gods, no one believes in Sutek, no one believes in any of these Egyptian gods. No one believes that. Even Egyptian people tend to be Muslim. It means that however offensive it is to these gods, no one's going to care.
Yes, I will agree that this was less offensive than that Gods of Egypt movie.
I've not seen that. What's so bad about that?
No, I mean, it's just a terrible film.
Mm.
I mean, it's less offensive than Jared Butler playing an Egyptian god.
Okay.
No, it's one of those things, again, where it's like the suicide. I doubt it's there for the most sincere reasons. But at this point, it's not played off as a crass joke or anything. It fits this weirdly, I keep saying it, weirdly sincere tone of the movie. Which is something that, again, like, modern filmmakers don't do as much. I don't know how much you know about 19 remake? Puppet Master.
Puppet Master.
It's a very loose remake. It's kind of a reboot. It's called Puppet Master: The Littlest Reich.
I've not watched it yet. I haven't got that far. I'm on Puppet Master 8 at the moment.
I hear it's alright, but I hear it's kind of divisive. But one of the interesting things about it in the reboot is that they make Toulon a Nazi.
Oh, no.
It's more straight up that the puppets are Nazi puppets. In the movie, they go around killing minorities and stuff.
Oh, dear.
So that's what I mean about these modern, like, I mean, I understand that horror should be confrontational. There's a difference between confrontational and just crass, which I feel like some of these more independent horrors these days feel like have to be.
Yeah.
And that's what I like about these early Puppet Masters, is that aside from when some of the kills start, this film is barely a comedy or a horror. I'm not sure what I would classify it as.
I would say the kills make it a horror, but there's no comedy, really. Toulon's death is actually quite grim.
But this thing, the kills don't happen until like an hour in, and then it feels like, oh yeah, this is a horror. But for like the first hour, it's just people walking around a hotel room. What is this film? Like, this is a weird thriller drama. The comedy I would bring in, because as you say, there's not many comedic moments, but it is so strange that the introduction to the dolls is that we first see them in a sympathetic light. Here's Toulon bringing the doll to life. They don't want to be caught by the Nazis, so that makes them good dolls. And then we see, like, the main doll, Blades, which is this evil-looking doll in a black trench coat and hat, and he's got one arm is a blade and one arm is a hook. I mean, he looks noticeably more evil than, say, Chucky, when he's a good guy doll. And yet, the main introduction to him is running into a woman at the hotel. She screams, and then he screams as well and runs away.
He's really, really cute, despite being a Gestapo.
We're unsure what this movie is getting at. And that's a big thing about these dolls. Like, are they good guys? Are they bad guys? They're kind of both and neither. It's so strange.
And Puppet Master 2 muddies the waters. And then Puppet Master 3 basically makes the water mud. Odd. You can't know throughout every film whether Toulon's going to be a good guy, a bad guy, or what. And this Jewish guy who was pursued by the Nazis, who then ended up taking his own life, there's no way he should have ended up as a baddie. It's like, what the actual fuck?
Toulon becomes a big character in the later films, but right now he's just an old man that's in the film for 5 minutes. Let's get into the actual plot here. And now it's the modern day, I say modern day, so late 80s. Bunch of psychics all receive a psychic call to go to the hotel from their old friend. And again, this is a weird establishment that just casually expects us to roll with, psychic magic is real. Okay.
I would argue that Alex's hairdo and Frank's hairdo would suggest that it is not present day for you and I.
I was going to say, I very much enjoy that ponytail on Frank reminded me of the main. It reminded me of the main dude from It, the miniseries.
Right.
When he has that ponytail. And
it's a good look.
It's a very unintentional trend, but I love these older 80s and 90s movies where, as a modern person, you look back and you're like, were these leading men meant to be attractive?
Well, I was actually going to talk about that. Reggie in Phantasm was really ugly and had that fucking hairdo. There does seem to be like late 80s horror. It has ugly men protagonists, but insanely attractive women.
Well, definitely like in their mid-20s.
And I realised that as a, mid-40s gay bloke with no hair and, average looking, it isn't particularly graceful of me to go, oh, look at the ugly bloke. But still, the difference between the perceived stereotypical attractiveness levels of the men and the women in this film, that's got to be deliberate.
I don't think they're objectively ugly. I think they're more ordinary looking. I think that's something that only happened in later movies and maybe, like the Friday the 13th and the Nightmare on Elm Streets, where horror movies had to have all high schoolers, young attractive casts. Those bigger movies, the cast needs to be relatable for the audience. I think some of these earlier movies, like your Phantasms, these movies, a lot of people say the main guy in the It miniseries is very clearly, he's a struggling writer. He's based on Stephen King. I think a lot of these male characters are based on the writers and directors.
Right.
Who are very much like, you know what? A middle-aged, balding, ordinary man, he can be the hero, and he can get the girl.
It's just so misogynistic, isn't it? That attractiveness is important. Just, men.
For all of horror, the women. they have to be mid-20s attractive women. I don't know why they're with some of the men in these films.
Yeah.
They go so overboard with that in the Phantasm series. Reggie is bizarrely such a ladies' man.
Yeah, I can't remember the character's name, but the fact that he slept with the nunchucker-wielding black ninja lady, beyond attractive. She was so gorgeous and an absolute kick-ass badass. And she slept with Reggie. I'm like, come on. Now I can't suspend my disbelief. I can suspend my disbelief for the fucking tall man, but I couldn't suspend my disbelief for that.
To be fair, Reggie both had an ice cream truck and a quadruple barrel shotgun. That's pretty awesome.
An ice cream truck does not get you a babe like that.
But back to these characters.
Yes, we're not talking about Phantasm, although I would enjoy doing that.
There are little people in that. There's some segue with Chucky.
We're not doing Phantasm.
So these characters are all psychics. We're just meant to believe psychics are real. And they throw in these muddy waters where one of the characters is a fortune teller and they introduce her with this whole crystal ball thing. Oh, I've got bad news about your grandmother. And the woman's like, my grandmother's already dead. Oh, I meant his grandmother. But then she is psychic? So...
Yeah. She came across very much as a fraud in that scene. And then she had incredible levels of psychic powers later on in the film. We're like, then why did you do that? She came across as a right cunt. She could have actually used her psychic power. Makes no sense.
Yeah, and then the same thing with the introduction to Frank and his partner.
Frank's awful. Horrible. Pervy shithead.
It's so weird. They're doing this experiment like Bill Murray at the start of Ghostbusters. A medical equipment hooked up to a woman. And they're trying to read her mind. But then he doesn't need the equipment to read her mind. So I don't know what the equipment is doing.
No, it all makes no sense. And if maybe, Frank and Alex and the others were legit and Dana had been a fraud and that had been a plot point, that would have been brilliant. But she wasn't.
Yeah, we'll get into what the psychicness does to the plot. Very little. I don't understand how any of it really ties up together because There's a lot of scenes in this of these characters having premonitions of their deaths and having premonitions of scenes in the future. And I feel that is the whole psychic thing was just put in there. The film is already 88 minutes and there's so many scenes of people just seeing the future. How can we reuse footage in a creative way? Just have people see the film ahead of time. A lot of these premonitions in another film, you would think, oh, that character has seen their own death, so they're going to do something and change that. No, we just see the same scene twice.
Yeah. I've got nothing other than that, yeah. And that does become a massive pattern across the entire franchise of just, holy shit, they reuse footage a lot.
It's mostly a legit movie, aside from just constant premonitions that don't matter.
There's a little bit of stock footage in it.
Yeah.
And photographs pretending to be footage. The actor who played Toulon managed to just about successfully portray fear and desperation acceptably. These scenes with all the psychics, the acting is definitely something.
I like... however they say her name, Dana. I like Dana, but I think that's less acting and her just doing like a southern drawl.
Yeah.
I think that's the most you get. Everyone else is pretty much just reading their lines.
Yeah.
Because it makes sense. So much of this plot, technically, mechanically, doesn't matter. That it is just scenes of them saying stuff. So, like, how can you add emotion to stuff when it's so unclear what is happening?
I feel like we're really, really slagging this film off. But I really enjoyed it and had a jolly old time. I don't need my horror acting to be fucking Oscar winning, you know?
True, yeah.
Dear.
They all receive a call from their friend Neil. They mention the Puppet Master, so we know that they know something about the past. It will be quite a while, like 30 minutes in, until they actually explain their whole connection.
I mean, they prioritised a pair of tits before we actually got any kind of answer to anything we wanted to know.
Getting drip-fed information here. When they get there, they find out that their friend Neil is dead. He has married a woman, Megan, and she runs the hotel. And they are mainly confused why they got called there.
Yeah.
Again, in terms of plotting, and especially pacing, a lot of this movie is just people wondering why they're even here.
Yeah.
Casual character building, which would be nice in a movie like this if the characters could, act. And then there's also a lot of more confusing psychological stuff or psychic stuff. People are saying stuff like, somehow he was able to block the image that he sent that signal to us. Are you going to explain any of this?
Which they didn't.
Dana has had 2 premonitions about 2 deaths, and she does not mention it to anyone.
And it's established that they all believe that psychic powers are real, and that this world's psychic powers are real. So why the fuck didn't she?
This is my main complaint. I was going to bring it up later, but this seems like a good point to bring it up because this is the point in the movie where I'm really tuning out. I like a lot of bits in this movie, but not the movie as a whole because it slogs. Movies are acting and reacting. It's like the classic hero's journey. Like the first half is the character, the protagonist, reacting to stuff happening, and then the second half, that character acts, and that's where he becomes the protagonist, the hero. And his acting changes the plot and it creates the ending. So much of this movie is people just sitting around talking and not really about anything.
What I will say, though, is that the Doll's Eye View stuff is really well done. I really liked that. And I think the doll stuff is where this film is strong. The acting is terrible. The pacing isn't great. The dialogue isn't great. But I'll be damned if Blade wasn't really, really well done. And I was pleasantly surprised.
I do like a lot of the dolls in this, yeah. I like Pinhead. Pinhead's a really interesting one when he's introduced. Yeah. He's got a tiny little head. Why it's called Pinhead. But he's got like really big arms. And I think for some of the shots when he's punching an actual man's hand that is like shoved into it, it's a really odd effect, but it works quite well. So there's some really interesting dolls in this.
This first film establishes almost all of the dolls that we'll then see across another 7 or 8 films. They do seem to have more personality and more interestingness about them than literally any of the other characters apart from Toulon.
Although this first half of the movie is, we see the dolls running around, doing their little things. Pinhead comes out of the coffin at some point. He's just there. But we're focusing more on the characters here. We've got Carissa, who's with Frank. She has a vision of the past. Neil, their friend, raped someone in an elevator. Does that come up later in the plot? No.
Yeah. Why then?
I guess at most it shows us that Neil is a bad guy.
Yeah.
But I mean, who is that woman? We don't know. She says that it's not his wife. So I guess it's just some woman at the hotel then.
Yeah, it really should have been.
You could tie that in with the character. You know, he's a man who wants control. Tie that in with the whole thing that, you know, he wants control over women. Get away with rape and that. But no, that's not an idea that ever comes up.
It really does feel like I've got these cool puppets. Let's write something that takes 5 minutes that means I can use them.
Again, it's not the Full Moon that we know now that puts out absolute trash. This feels like a film that everyone at least half-assed. So Charles Band was trying to write characters that seem interesting. If these were your typical slasher victims, you introduce them and then you just start killing them. There's a lot of dialogue, a big dinner scene, and getting to know a bit more of the characters, exploring, you know, Neil as a character. It's sort of good. I see what they're going for. They're trying to make it not just about the puppets.
In hindsight, is a mistake.
Yeah, there's not much you learn about the characters in this sequence, other than Dana is a drunk asshole.
We already knew she was an asshole. She's a charlatan. But she's not a charlatan, and that makes no sense. What? Oh, dear.
And then some of the other characters, like Carissa, I don't really know what she does in the plot.
Or dies.
Neil shows up, like he's just sitting around at places, and everyone's like, who moved that body? I mean, I don't think they even question that. They're just like, what's he doing there? And they put it back. And I don't think anyone questions, like, is there someone else in the hotel?
They did establish that sticking a pin in him means he's definitely dead.
They didn't even question the reasonable thing that someone else might be there.
Oh, also, right, how incredibly disrespectful is it to stab the dead body of your friend? So the open coffin thing is minging anyway. We've talked about this before.
Oh, yeah.
But next level, testing a body is dead by stabbing it. Come on.
And you know, that doesn't even make sense, that scene, because later, spoilers, Neil is undead, but he still feels pain. So that scene should have had Neil screaming in that coffin.
I think I covered that earlier with plots with more holes than Swiss cheese.
The lining to the inside of that coffin was the Last Supper. Is that a clever reference to resurrection?
I don't think
like,
so.
Well, you know, the main characters are having this dinner because their friend is dead, and then their friend comes back afterwards.
So wait, you're saying he's Jesus?
Well, I'm saying he thinks of himself like Jesus.
That's deep. That is dev. I don't think it was intentional.
If it was intentional, they really should have put more emphasis on it, because it's the one smart thing in this movie.
Can we just talk about the puppets? I'm bored of the actual people.
Well, that's what I'm saying. So much of this film is just the people being boring. We get the explanation only like 40 minutes in, where Alex is like, yeah, this is how we all knew Neil. We were all working together, trying to figure out the secrets to Toulon's magic, because we believed that that could bring about resurrection and people coming back to life. Even though their friend, his body, is being moved around the hotel, they don't question anything. They're just like, you know what, let's go to bed. That's what I mean. And that's my other big complaint about this movie. You know, I mean, that's what I mean about acting and reacting. These characters are doing like nothing. They're just like, we're in a hotel, let's just have dinner and then go to bed. That's like 2/3 of this movie. Now we get to the actual horror stuff, where... And it's very suddenly. We get the puppets peeping, some of the characters. Did the puppets see anyone nude? Are they peeping on someone nude at some point? Are they peeping on... I remember they're enjoying something. You got Blade and then... God, what's his name? Drillhead? Driller?
Tunneler.
Oh, that's it. I knew it was something.
Rude. Yeah. I'm quite attached to these puppets after 8 films, although they have all kind of merged into one, so I'm slightly struggling to keep the chat focused on the first film.
Blade and Tunneler, they literally pull up a chair in the hallway to look through a keyhole, and they're peeping on the characters. And that made me think these dolls have been in the hotel for decades now. Do they not have like little secret tunnels in the walls? They're literally just running around the hallways. And eventually they start killing. Who do they kill first? Carissa, isn't it? No, the first person they kill, I want to say Teresa, her name was?
Oh, well, I don't know.
There's like a hotel maid. And
that's right.
Yeah, she dies early on. Yeah, Dana has a premonition of her death. Don't go near the fireplace. She does go near the fireplace. Pinhead smashes her over the head. But then the body disappears and no one really questions it. we get to the real kills here. Carissa and Frank are having some, I was going to say kinky sex, but it's not. In these days, it's quite tame sex. Frank gets tied to the bed in some weird experiment. They say it's like an experiment, but they just seem to be having sex.
Yeah, and again, it's just an excuse for tits, really, isn't it?
This will be an experiment in sexual implementations and tools and stuff. But then they just use a blindfold, and that's about it.
If that is the sexual experimentation, then I'm a fucking professor.
So they're having sex, and yes, as you say, we got the quota in, and we get some tits, some TNA, and we got a lot of that because she was in the bath for about 20 minutes before.
Yeah.
She's the first one to go because she notices the door opens and someone is in the room, and she looks under the bed, and there's Tunneler in a pretty impressive little scene.
Yeah.
The little stop motion of him under the bed is quite creepy.
Yeah.
I mean, the gore is kind of tame, but I understand how this film is enduring. I imagine a lot of kids rented this.
Yeah.
And those images stick with people.
Well, I think those images stick with people because, they're reused. But no, but you're right. The animation of Tunneler, Blades, and the others is great. That's clearly where they spent their money. I also think they only paid one actor to get her tits out because they probably had to pay her more than the other female actors to get her tits out. So they were like, well, if she's going to get her tits out, we're going to make sure we get her tits out as much as we can. Tits.
You also get that in that flashback rape sequence where the actress gets one tit out.
Do you think she got paid slightly less because it was one tit rather than both tits?
Oh god, I imagine someone like Charles Band probably did try and use that logic.
The plot about why they're killing is ropey here and completely undermines later on in the franchise because they're supposed to be the goodies, but they're just randomly murdering at the moment.
Right now, we don't know why they're murdering. We can maybe assume that they killed Neil. No, wait, Neil killed himself, but maybe they actually did kill him. Good kill here. Tunneler charges Carissa. I would say more effectively, we don't see it, but we hear the drilling.
Yeah.
We hear the drilling. We hear the squishing blood and meat and her muffled screams. Poor Frank, blindfolded and tied to the bed, so he can't do anything. And then we get the introduction to another puppet here. Is her official name Leech Woman?
It is Leech Woman, and holy fucking fuck. She is creepy as hell, legitimately scary, and grim. She's brilliant, and I loved it, and I wasn't expecting it, and I was like, what the actual fuck is she doing?
Yeah, I love Leech Woman. Leech Woman is strange. She's just like a porcelain doll who can extend her jaw, and leeches crawl out of her mouth onto people.
Just pukes leeches. Good.
It's such a grotesque image, especially if you put yourself in the position of Frank where you can't move and you can't defend yourself. But on the other hand, do these leeches ever kill anyone in these movies?
Yeah, there's a leech that goes inside someone's mouth and eats them from the inside.
Because, in this film at least, it doesn't really seem like they are that effective.
That's part of the charm of the puppets, is that they are a little bit inept. Pinhead, he's got big hands, so all he is a small person who can punch you. He's got no skill. Leech Woman, she pukes leeches, which is gross. What's a leech going to do to you? And Blaze, he's got a little knife and he's got a hook. But it's a little knife. You need to get it right with that knife to do some real damage. And Jester is completely inept. It's only like when we see Six Shooter in subsequent films. He's scary as fuck. He's got 6 little guns that can pepper you with. And later on gets 6 lasers. So Six Shooter adds a little bit of peril. The others are a bit naff, really. And I find that completely charming. And then later on, they introduce Torch, who is genuinely fucking scary as hell. Flamethrower. And that is so much more powerful than the others, to the point where he's used once and kind of sort of forgotten because he's almost too powerful for what they're trying to do with these films. And also probably fire deaths are expensive. There's something about the puppets are charming, despite the fact they never talk. It's completely at their whim whether they're killing for fun or killing for evil or killing to protect someone.
Very much like Freddy or Jason or Michael. You can have a revolving cast, a new line of victims. These franchises are successful on whether or not people like the killers.
You're right. I mentioned it at the very, very start, how cute Blade is, despite the fact he's a murderous, murderous little fuck.
Because, I mean, even after this, like, I feel like I'm slating this movie. I've still got that trial going. I'm going to give Puppet Master 2 a go. I'm free. You know, I'll give the sequels a go. I want to watch them. Despite the fact that, yeah, these dolls are quite ineffective. We have the Dana kill coming up. You see what happens when characters actually see these dolls coming. Pinhead is quite effective. You know, he punches her in the face, like square in the jaw a number of times. And yet, like Chucky, they are just a doll. You can just pick them up and just throw them.
He's got good hands. Why doesn't he pick up a weapon? He's only ever any good when he hits someone with, like, a tire iron or something. A punch hurts, of course it does. They're supposed to be killer dolls, not punchy dolls.
It is funny that he's just the most ineffective one, because he gets chucked down a stairwell.
Oh, across the franchise, across all the films, Pinhead, he's just there to get a kick in. And there's something charming about his relentlessness, despite the fact he's utterly ineffective.
Blade gets the kill here. He's covered in blades, so he's a bit more deadly.
He's not covered in blades. He's got a lick or knife hand and he's got a hook. That's not covered in blades.
And every now and again he has little spikes that come out of his eyes.
Which have never, ever been used for anything other than aesthetics across 7 films that I've watched in the last week. I would love him to, like, shoot spikes out of his eyes or kind of headbutt someone and these eyes... No, he's never done any of that. They're just aesthetics. He's not badass.
Yeah, as you said, they're not voiced. Well, they don't say dialogue, but they are voiced in that they do little... they do little noises. Blade does seem to be enjoying the murders. Does not correlate with any explanation of his character.
I don't care. I don't care. He's cute and it's funny. And the thing is, Blade, whenever he needs to pick something up, he has to go and get Pinhead. It's just thoroughly enjoyed this film. There's so much crap, so much pointless shite, and it only gets worse film by film by film.
This is definitely the highlight. These 3 murders in a row. You know, it's exactly what was promised when you are told about a movie like this.
The last 20 minutes of this film is absolutely worth all the weird dialogue and tonal changes that are confusing. It's very much, at the end of it, I just wrote down finale, bravo.
This whole sequence is worth it. And yes, the finale is also great. But then I looked at the time and I thought, why the fuck do we have 25 minutes left and the only character left is Alex? And then Megan is also there. Like, are we gonna have like half an hour of just Alex? There's a whole before the finale. There is a whole sequence where he is in his hotel room. Megan knocks on the door. She's like, "I've got something to show you." They go up a stairwell. We see the entire sequence of them going up a stairwell. They go through a corridor. They go into a dining room, and it's like, "Oh no, here's the finale." Alex wakes up. He's still in his hotel room, and then Megan knocks on the door. "I've got something to show you." They go up that fucking stairwell again. They go down the fucking corridor again. They waste so much of time.
It would be fair to say this could have been cut down to maybe 65 minutes.
And then they run down the stairwell as well. I thought this was after the finale, but they run down the stairwell. They don't just run down 1 flight of stairs. They run down like 6 flights of stairs and we see every step.
Damn, stop criticising it. I really enjoyed this film.
But no, I am on your side, because then eventually they do get to the finale. Surprise, surprise, we reveal that Neil is alive. He is the titular puppet master, controlling these puppets to kill everyone. It's a shame that Neil only shows up now because his overacting is leagues above everybody else's acting.
So I put down in my notes, his panto cackle is everything.
He is so cartoonishly evil.
It's definitely that.
It saves it because so much of this is also talking. He has a lot of exposition trying to explain his motivations.
Whilst true, I think the exposition with the background of the dead bodies sat around the table is actually really quite grim and really kind of good horror, actually. But as well as his ham, the bodies really helps too.
And as for motivations, the motivation was...
I don't need that.
The motivation seems to be that because they helped him figure out this Puppet Master thing, I guess together they located where the secrets of the Puppet Master were, and he went on his own and figured out how to come back from the dead. His only motivation for killing these people seems to be that sooner or later they would figure out that he was alive.
Kind of the ravings of a madman. That makes sense to me. in a really simplistic way.
It is a shame that we never actually see Neil in any of the sequels. Like the protagonists, he does not seem to be a big part of the franchise.
Good point. He would have actually been quite interesting.
Because, yeah, his acting is quite fun. And
fun is an interesting way of putting it, Devon.
Hey, you're the one raving about this movie. You can at least call it fun.
It is definitely fun.
It only seems spurred on by the fact that Neil is like, I was experimenting on these puppets, but I don't need them anymore. And he throws Jess to the side. I don't think he even throws him on the floor. He throws him onto a soft chair.
Poor Jester.
This one act of cruelty seems to be enough to break the spell, and all the other puppets look at each other like, "Oh my god, is this guy bad? Are we on the bad side?" I don't think it's even that so much. It's just that they don't like being mistreated, because they do, in this film at least, seem to enjoy the murder.
And they do exactly the same thing in the next film. That's how the next film ends. It's like, but can we not have a slightly different finale, please?
I mean, I feel like it makes even less sense in 2 because that's their puppet master. In this, at least it's some other puppet master. Neil punches Megan because obviously he doesn't care about her anymore. Their whole marriage was just a ruse to get into the hotel. Because he punched a woman, that's when Alex is like, you know what, I'm going to be the hero. And they start scuffling like middle-aged men do. They just fall to the floor immediately and they're just rolling around.
So 80s.
Neil is pushed into the elevator that we've been seeing the whole movie. That's when Pinhead closes the door. They've had enough. The puppets are revolting against the master. Neil gets his little fingers chopped off, which is gruesome because you see all the little embalming fluid come out.
The problem with any scene like that is I've seen I Spit on Your Grave. And so basically the scene where a dick is chopped off. I can't really feel like someone's fingers is as bad as that scene ever. And it always makes me think of that scene. Human body part on board, chop, they come off. I can't ever be as kind of freaked out as when it was someone's dick. But yes, it's well done, and the embalming fluid thing was brilliant.
Yeah, and that's not all he gets. He really gets the business from every puppet. You know, he falls to the floor. Tunneler goes into his neck, which really seems like that should have been the kill. Leech woman appears. She vomits up a leech into his mouth, which is gross. Oh my god, yeah, the final kill, Pinhead actually does something. He breaks his neck.
That's true. Well done, Pinhead.
But also, it just seemed like a waste of time if Neil was going to come back from the dead and then could just die again.
Yeah, he seems remarkably vulnerable considering how powerful he thought he was.
He very much said that there's no way you can defeat me, Alex. Like, he says, like, the only way to defeat me is the total destruction of my body. And I'm so much stronger than you now.
But he wasn't stronger than a puppet with big hands.
Yeah, he is immortal until he trips down the stairs and breaks his neck.
I don't care.
I mean, for some reason, Alex cared. He was banging on the elevator door going, no, stop.
Why?
That really confused me. He was just fighting Neil. I don't know why he'd want the dolls to stop.
Some kind of weird zombie Egyptian thing. No, he shouldn't be alive because he died. That's grim. And why?
Alex was just a proper babyface. He was just like, no, he should be put in jail for his crimes.
And then in the next film, he gone mad.
In this film, the next scene is fade to black. Fade to him leaving. Well, my cab's waiting. What? What? That's the resolution to everything that's just happened?
There's also a dog.
All of his friends got murdered. What happened to them? Like, this place should be swarming with police, surely. I mean, they're by the sea. Did he just bury his friends at sea and then call it a day?
Also, why didn't he get arrested?
Also, if he's screaming no, I mean, the film was called Puppet Master. All of his friends died by puppets. What happened to the puppets? In the elevator. Where did they go?
They just mooched off, carried on with their life.
And then after that, it wasn't like, Megan, we've got to get the hell out of here. He they waited until morning. He packed his bags. He called a cab. It's all over. And then, I wouldn't even say it's a subplot. Dana had a stuffed dog called Leroy, who she talked to, which now I'm questioning, was she actually talking to him, like his spirit, or was she just talking to him just someone else would? But anyway, at the end of the movie, Megan is with Leroy, but Leroy is back alive, which means now Megan knows the secrets of immortality.
And that is never looked at again in the entire franchise.
I mean, they do say in this film, the magic and the dolls can be used for good or evil. So I guess this is like, her whole marriage was a sham. Her husband killed a bunch of people. I guess this is her happy ending. Now she has a dog.
To be fair, a dog is a happy ending. I want a dog.
This ending is so blasé in the way it just wraps up.
When we're talking again comparisons to Chucky, I like that he is at least mentioned at the start of the second film and that he actually had a very similar experience to Karen. You go through something like this. I mean, obviously this is much more ridiculous than Child's Play. It will affect you mentally, and both of these films, late 80s, even though it was just a little nod, at least address that.
Yeah, you say they address, but Puppet Master 2 came out just a year later in 1990. And even that close, they just sort of truncate it into Alex just went nuts. Do they even mention the other deaths?
No, they don't. But it's similar to Child's Play when you think about it. It's just one line that vaguely says this character's not in this film now.
Did they say Megan died? Or is Megan fine?
I think Megan's just like chill with her pooch.
Megan isn't in the second one, but isn't the second one still set in the hotels? She's either dead or she moved on. I'm talking about a movie I haven't seen. Okay, we're not going to spend as much time talking about the sequels.
I have seen them all, but they've kind of merged into one, Dev.
So let's talk about briefly where this franchise goes. So Puppet Master 2, the direct sequel, is a sequel in the sense that it's set after another team of people come in to investigate supernatural happenings of the first movie.
And it's an absolute heel turn for Toulon. It is made fundamentally clear that he is the bad guy. He resurrects himself into a life-sized doll and sends the puppets on a murderous killing spree. But he's the fucking victim. Why have you done this?
My reasoning for that is that it's similar to Neil. I guess coming back sort of warps your morality of good and evil.
Because don't justify it. They made a Jewish victim of the Nazis into the bad guy.
So this film starts with them resurrecting Toulon, and he comes back like the Invisible Man, bandages and cool sunglasses. And again, that just raises questions that the dolls resurrected him. Why didn't they do that 1940? Like a year after he committed suicide?
Oh, minor detail.
And the Puppet Master is, quote-unquote, justifiably evil because he needs brains for the serum that brings people and dolls back to life. None of this was mentioned in the first film.
Oh, that's a minor detail, though. It didn't need to be mentioned in the first film. It wasn't relevant. I'm going to defend these films.
Then the ending of that is it's even more insane. He's like, my body is all decrepit and old, so I'm going to transfer my soul into a new body. One of the main characters, the final girl, this woman resembles my wife, so I'm going to... it's the Mummy plot. Okay, making some sense so far. He's not that insane. And then you see the bodies that he's going to put them in, and it's these life-size dolls that look terrifying. It's like a first aid dummy.
I actually think they're really, really well done, the life-size human dolls. Although
they are incredibly creepy.
Toulon life-size doll did look a bit like Frank Sidebottom.
The videos I watched recapping these films, the guy was British, and he also mentioned Frank Sidebottom. I swear to God, he also made that comparison. He's these big eyes that, do they blink when he comes back? Or are they just always open? Yeah, it's very creepy, but then it's like, how the fuck is he going to re-enter society looking like this? He looked less scary as the Invisible Man.
Yes, but he was a dying, resurrected corpse and probably smelt.
True. And I guess this living doll didn't smell. Although he sort of has like brain juice in him. So is there a reason in the film that the dolls turn on him?
He becomes a baddie. And they explicitly see him being a baddie. It's hardly sophisticated.
There's sort of less reasoning in the second one why they did a turn. And then this is, I guess, another technical complaint, a nitpick, if you will, that the characters really don't do anything to actually save the day. It's just happenstance that the dolls just happen to face turn and just kill the bad guy themselves.
So I don't think at this point they'd realised quite what they were doing with the fact that it is basically irrelevant what the people are around these cool dolls. They just completely retcon this film repeatedly. Toulon is suddenly a babyface again across the board in subsequent films. They even try and justify it in one which is basically a Friends clip show. I think that was the 5th one. These whole films, it really, really doesn't matter what the plot is. It doesn't matter when it's set. As long as we've got these fun little puppets doing murderous shit. My favourite of the subsequent films was actually Retro Puppet Master, where they had wooden marionette versions of all these characters. They were really, really lovely, and some real thought, effort and time was put into creating almost prototypes for the ones we see across the other films. And that one seemed to have a little bit of time, effort and money put into it. And it was a really fun film with a franchise that people had grown genuinely fond of, despite the fact some of the stuff that they've done is just nonsensical shite.
Pun intended. I started this as the Puppet Master nerd. I was trying to think of something that I didn't mean I was the Puppet Master. I started as the Puppet Master nerd who knew all the stuff about the timeline and all the sequels and that, but I had only seen the first film. And then you had fully eclipsed me.
Well done.
Watching all of these films in like a weekend.
I haven't watched all of them. I've only watched 8 of them.
Which is most of them.
So the last one I watched was Puppet Master versus Demonic Toys. When Corey Feldman plays the great-grandson of Andre Toulon with the worst acting ever. Corey Feldman was someone. He does not give a shit in a Puppet Master film. Bloody hell. The puppets were full on babyface in that film. They were the protagonists and the demonic toys were the antagonists. The first 2 films are almost ignored subsequently because people thought that the puppets were cool. The puppets from that point on become the goodies. It doesn't matter if baddies in the first 2 films, does it? Does matter, does it? We'll gloss over that.
If people don't know Puppet Master too well, they're going to think, oh, this whole franchise is puppets in a hotel killing people. Do you want to give a brief summary of where this franchise goes?
From that point onwards, Andre Toulon very much becomes a babyface of a very sympathetic character who was basically got in trouble with the Nazis for doing puppet shows that mocked the Reich and mocked Hitler. He comes back in like as a ghost and he's like, I'm with you in spirit for one of the future main protagonists. We've seen you put your body into a doll and fucking kill everyone in Puppet Master 2. But you're supposed to be this fucking Ben Kenobi type character. And if you watch each film without knowing about Puppet Master 2, he does actually become an almost effective, lovable old man in a terrible position. And regardless of when he shot himself, because it probably can't be 1939 because subsequent films are set after 1939 and he's alive, there's huge holes. Like I said before, Retro Puppet Master is probably my favourite. Do kind of have to get used to the fact that Mark from The Room plays Toulon in that one. I spent the first 10 minutes going, where do I recognise him? Go and throw an American football around really inept.
Toulon is sympathetic and alive. Most of these sequels are set in the past. Most of these are World War II period films.
With dolls. Murderous dolls.
Where the dolls are the good guys killing Nazis.
I won't have anyone say that these films are shit. The thing is, right, if you want an overview of the whole of the first 5 films, watch the 5th one. Basically a clip show of the other films with tiny little bits of dialogue between these 2 characters in between. Why did you it's like The Simpsons at the end of a season where they're like, do you remember when we did this? And then it cuts back to previous. And what I really loved, one of the films had previously reused footage from one of the films. And they had the same footage twice in this fucking clip show. They're just so cheap. You know, don't sit down, make it your evening that you're going to thoroughly enjoy and analyse these films. Put them on while you're tidying your house.
Yeah, for all the bad stuff I've said about the first film, other franchises have done the same. You know, people say that about TV shows, like you can just skip season 1. It's just setting up the show later. You can say it in movies, you know. I like Friday the 13th, but I wouldn't say it's the best of the franchise. I think you can easily just jump into some of the sequels where Jason is who you expect him to be, and like the people making it know what they're doing. A lot of my admiration for Puppet Master comes from like knowing where all these sequels goes and what they do. Charles Band loves reusing footage and like tying films together and being like, Puppet Master 9 is set between 4 and 5, really complicated timelines, all during World War II.
Yeah.
But then at the same time, every sequel makes the plot even more confusing, because the first film, it's just like, oh yeah, these puppets are evil. They're just evil spirits or whatever. It's like, no, these dolls have victims of World War II. Their souls are put into the dolls.
Yeah, they have human people's consciousnesses inside them.
See any of that in the first couple films? They try to explain Blade, why Blade looks like that. Jester and Pinhead and stuff, they look fairly normal. Why does Blade look like a Gestapo thing? Because he was based on an actual Gestapo officer. But then he puts the victim of Nazi violence into the body of a Nazi doll. It's so confusing. It's so weird.
I'd find that quite harrowing, being inside a puppet version of the guy who killed me.
And I don't think any of these people, do any of them even ask for this? Toulon just does it.
No. Consent, Andre, consent.
To me, it feels like coma patients. I don't feel like these souls are fully alive like Chucky is inside a doll. It's very weird that Toulon is controlling these people afterwards.
It does feel a little bit unethical and mind rapey across the board. But let's skirt over that, because the puppets are cute, Dev. I thoroughly enjoyed this. It's pure, unadulterated, mindless tat. I'm so glad you showed me this.
No, I do. I love them too. And for all my whinging, I've seen way worse movies. I mean, like, quality-wise, I've seen, like, really shitty, like, shot on VHS movies. So, like, I don't know where a lot of my complaints are coming from. This shouldn't be compared to, like... To get it back to the whole podcast, this shouldn't really be compared to Chucky, because it's a much cheaper film.
It does have some similarities that can't be ignored. Stuff about transferring souls into dolls, stuff about killer dolls, stuff about a religious element to be able to do that. You can see why we actually decided to do this. But you're right, in the end, those similarities are kind of superfluous, really. There's no queerness here, there's no sophistication, and there's no real thought in the whole plot line, and it doesn't feel like the writer's very good.
And I will acknowledge as well, like, the fan base. Chucky has quite an active fan base. I mean, we're big fans, so we're part of it. Like, I guess you could, our whole podcast dedicated to Chucky is a good example of the Chucky fandom. The Puppet Master fandom is it's more niche, but it's just as active. You can buy these dolls from Full Moon, and they're like $200 each.
Maybe that's where they make their fucking £400,000 to make the fucking next ones.
And like, yeah, I mean, you say that, but I mean, seriously, like, the people that make these YouTube videos about the franchise and stuff, they have like shelves of all the dolls. They spend their money on this franchise.
I would like a Blade doll, but I don't think I'd £200 like a Blade doll.
Yeah. You can probably get a smaller one.
But I'd want him to be the right size.
Yeah, I mean, that's the same for the Chucky dolls. If you want the one-to-one Chucky dolls, those are quite expensive as well.
Right, okay. Who's your favourite puppet across the series?
I mean, Blades is pretty cool. Everyone likes Blades.
He's just cute, isn't he? He's got a cute face.
I got his name wrong, but I do like Tunneler.
Yeah, I think Tunneler's the most badass. I was genuinely sad for Leech Woman's death, and then when I discovered that she was Toulon's murdered wife soul in there, it became even more tragic.
That's really fucked up. Why did he put his wife in such a weird doll?
I know, right? I was going to say I want a Blade doll. I don't think I want a little Gestapo officer in my home. So even though he's my favourite, I've decided I don't want a Blade doll after all.
Yeah, you do have to explain that. He is based on a Gestapo, but he is the soul of... I can't remember if the guy is Jewish or not, but he has the soul of someone who's not a Nazi, and he did kill Nazis, so it's okay.
Someone walks into your home. Why have you got a skull-faced Gestapo doll, Mark? with a knife hand. I think he's my favourite.
I mean, to be fair though, I mean, if you're getting into the extended Full Moon lore, they made a later film. I forget the name. It's called like Dangerous Dolls, Deadly Dolls. And the dolls in that were Ooga Booga, who was a little bone through the nose, spear and shield.
Oh dear.
Little African man. You've got Crack Whore.
Crack Whore.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, good.
You've got, cannot remember his exact name, but it was something along the lines of like Fudge Packer. It was about as that. There is a doll of, I think, a Vietnamese Chinese caricature, and I literally cannot say his name because it is a slur.
Oh, good grief. I don't want to watch that. So, yes, Puppet Master isn't sophisticated, but I wouldn't go as far as saying it's actively fucking prejudiced. That doesn't sound much fun, Dev.
No, and you can buy those dolls. You can buy
the
little Chinese doll with a slur as his name, and it's just on the box. But yeah, no, Puppet Master is leagues above some of Full Moon's other content. I don't think the franchise ever gets that crass either, does it?
No. Did you see that there's actually going to be a video game in 2022?
Oh, good lord. Are they producing it?
I've no idea, but I don't know whether it's going to be released on consoles or whether it'll be a mobile game or anything. But there is a video game coming, and do you know what? Maybe I'll come out of video game retirement to play that. It's bound to be shite. Oh, it'd be great if it was a fighting game, and you could like pick all the puppets and they fight each other.
With Full Moon's budget range, I can't imagine any more than like a mid-2000s Flash fighting game.
I'd play that for a hot 12 minutes.
That was Puppet Master. Is there any general way you can tie this back to Chucky? I guess if you like Child's Play 1 and Puppet Master 1, they don't necessarily compare. If you are someone who likes all of the Chucky movies, if you're someone who likes those ongoing horror franchises, Puppet Master is a really good one to get into.
Puppet Master is schlock, but I'll be damned if I haven't enjoyed everything I've watched.
God knows what the Rotten Tomato... God knows if some of the later ones even have Rotten Tomato scores. But
they don't.
You know, you look at these films, you look at Chucky, you look at Friday, you look at Nightmare. Aside from maybe a couple films, none of them have particularly high scores.
No.
No matter what complaints we say about Puppet Master, in the mainstream, they're all sort of in the same boat. We're in that boat, and we are in that boat.
Oh, yeah, and we are very much in that boat. And you'll enjoy Puppet Master. It's not as sophisticated, it's not as well made, and it's just not as good.
And it does go in weird directions. You know, we had a whole talk on Damballa and Voodoo. Fucking Sutek, the Egyptian god, literally shows up in these movies and starts fighting the puppet masters. Also, strangely, he is a puppet, but not like a puppet in the same way that the other puppets are. He just happens to be portrayed as a puppet.
Just weird.
Stay tuned for more nonsense like this. We're going to be covering other doll movies. We're going to be covering very different styles of doll movies. I don't know how many Mark has seen, but Mark has seen Dolly Dearest. So that's something.
I bloody love Dolly Dearest.
That's something we'll cover at some point. Something we've talked about is The Boy. No spoilers on Twitter for Mark. Mark hasn't seen him. That's a very different doll movie.
We're going to also look at Zapatletla, or I don't know whether I pronounced that right, but that's the Asian film, maybe Bollywood, I'm not even sure. It's basically a rewrite of Child's Play. I'm hoping for Bhangra, but there might not be Bhangra. I just picked that because I think it's going to be great fun.
From the looks of it, it is a Bollywood version of Child's Play. It's like it's like 2.5 hours, so I expect some musical sequences to pad that out.
Good. So we've got some weird ass shit we're going to watch.
And of course, between all that, we're going to be doing actual Chucky content, so don't worry. We're not going too far into the insanity.
No, we've got lots of plans, and we could have gone fortnightly, but we decided not to. We decided to keep it nice and gentle. Just keep it ticking along, you know?
We will see all of you guys next time, whatever we decide to do. But until then, wanna play?
Bloody hell, that was rather good. Well done.
I should have done a Puppet Master one, but what quotes are there from Puppet Master?
You could have gone with 6-shooter. But that's not very good.
No one's going to get any quotes from Puppet Master.
They're just not, are they?
CHUCKYVISION is a podcast brought to you by the We Made This Network. Follow us on Twitter at CHUCKYVISION. Follow the network on Twitter at WMT_network. Our website is WeMadeThisNetwork.com. The logo was designed by Carl Bryan, and the theme tune composed by Dark Fantasy Studios. Wanna play?
Elsewhere on We Made This. We dig music.
I got given a set of mindfulness cards as a Christmas present.
Okay.
And it's a load of fucking bollocks, it really is.
Is it like, with them being cards, I've got them, like, this image of them being like Brian Eno's Oblique Strategies, but with, like, go and read a book or something like that.
Yeah, pretty much. But so there are these cards, you read them one a day and you're meant to do the tasks. And the task on one day was...
Listen to Bruce Springsteen.
Go and listen to a piece of music that you haven't heard before and listen to it without any prejudice, regardless of genre. And I'm like, have you met me? That isn't possible.
I do that every day anyway.
So I went and listened to something I hadn't heard before and didn't know what genre it was going to be because it was from a set of polls on Twitter. And I listened to this song. It was about someone, an obsessive thoughts and worrying they were going to start cutting themselves. And I'm thinking, well, this isn't very mindful.
The TARDIS crew.
I do love pirates, but these just never gel for me, like all the pirate episodes on TV, and even the audios and the books. There's only been one pirate story in Doctor Who, which I've actually liked, and I did really enjoy that one. Except that wasn't really actual pirates, it was Badger pirates in space, but it was still piratey.
Badger pirates in space?
Yes. But I am willing to make an exception for pirates this episode, because Sea Devils.
Read and buried.
I felt safe when I was there the entire time.
Because you were the one killing people.
Yes, I was the British serial killer in Singapore.
What a plot twist. What a scoop that would be.
Imagine, we'd go viral.
His body was found in a graveyard.
Wow, that's up your alley, isn't it?
Right, yeah. As you see, now that out of context, people that don't know me, I just enjoy a graveyard. I think everyone enjoys a graveyard to a certain extent.
No.
No? Okay. I'm probably butchering those pronunciations, but I'm not going to apologise because they're murderers. So I think you lose the right. Yeah, you lose the right of good pronunciation when you kill people. Fair. But I will say, not victim blaming at all, but if on your first date someone wants to meet in a graveyard...
Yeah, that's an alarm bell.
I mean, as someone that loves graveyards, part of me would go, actually, that sounds quite nice. But I would just maybe take a friend.
Check out all of these shows and more on the We Made This podcast network.